Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the latest Abolitionist Approach webinar. Once again, Gary Francione and Anna Charlton will be talking about some questions relative to or relating to the Abolitionist Approach and vegan advocacy in general. And later on in the webinar, we'll be taking your questions. So for the moment, it's good afternoon, Gary and Anna.
Hello, Alan.
Hi, Alan. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you both?
Good.
Fine, thank you.
Sorry, you know, we try very hard to remember to get a decent camera, and we actually did have one this week, but I can't get it to work with the laptop. I don't know why. We have Windows 10. We just got Windows 10 on the computer. It's not working. So we have this camera.
Fuzzy thing.
Yeah, it's sort of fuzzy. Sorry about that.
That's okay. You're looking a little like a ghostly presence at the moment. It's not too bad, really.
Yeah. Yes, it's the spirit of abolitionism.
Yeah, it's the spirit of abolition.
Okay. Well, to get us going, I noticed that there's been a few additions to the Abolitionist Approach and How Do I Go Vegan websites this week in terms of new abolitionist resources, pamphlets, and so on.
Yeah, very excited.
You'd like to talk to us about them?
We have 6 dogs in this room, and 2 of them are busy wrestling with each other. So we hope that will not spread. Yeah, we have 5 new pamphlets that were designed by Frances McCormick. I believe you know her. And yes, and she did a very fine job. And I'd like to go through them briefly because I think they're really good advocacy tools. They're all great. I think they're all great. This is, in certain ways, my favorite. This is and I'm sorry, in addition to my computer not dealing well with my camera, I have an Epson printer, which I hate. It's one of the few inanimate objects that I really despise. It's horrible. I hate it. But in any event, this is it's really quite nice looking, but you're not going to see it.
They're all beautifully presented.
This is the fast food plan.
Can you hold it up further towards the centre between you and Anna so everyone can see it? There we go. That's better. That's great.
Great.
All right. Now, this is a terrific tool because, you oftentimes when you're doing vegan advocacy, people don't know. They say, well, gee, what am I going to eat? I don't know. It's also overwhelming. This is a 7-day plan of simple, inexpensive, wholesome, nutritious vegan food. Maggie, please stop this.
I'll take her out if she doesn't settle down.
And it's really this is, I think, such a useful thing to have when you're having the conversation with somebody who is not a vegan and someone who's intimidated by veganism, who says, I don't know what to do. It's also overwhelming. And you have this pamphlet to say, no, it's not. It's easy. It's simple. Here it is, all laid out for you. You can follow this plan. And it's really it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
And it has a link, the How Do I Go Vegan website on it.
Yes.
And I'm just delighted about this because people have been told that veganism requires, a strange and difficult and expensive diet.
Right.
And I think you need to be able to tell people, you're excited about this. You want to make that commitment. Yep. What are you going to eat tonight? Absolutely. And I think if they're stumped by what they're going to eat tonight, because they don't realize often that they're eating vegan food already. There are many vegan choices right there in their own kitchen for them to eat that evening. You might lose them. You might lose that moment of new commitment. So I am just delighted that advocates will have this to hand out. They can have whatever degree of follow-up they want to have with people they may have spoken to. But this gives people something to go home to, something that's sort of comforting and reassuring that says, yes, I can do this. And this is my plan for this week. And I'll work out all the details of conveniences and preferences and all that along the way. But this is, how do I go vegan today, practically in their hands?
And it's really reduces the anxiety. That's the thing. You know, it's like people say, I'm overwhelmed. And you say, no,
I can't do this.
There's no need to be overwhelmed. It's really quite easy. Here it is. Here's the pamphlet. And then go to howdoigovegan.com.
I will say that I have actually tried every single one of those recipes in that leaflet, and they're all great.
Great.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're all Francis's recipes.
Exactly.
And anyway, okay, the next pamphlet is Why Abolitionist Veganism? Because, there's veganism and then there's abolitionist veganism. And, that's what we promote. And it has 6 principles. And it's not just a question of veganism, but it's a way of thinking about veganism, a theory of veganism. And that's the pamphlet, Why Abolitionist Veganism. Okay.
Again, it has the link to howdoigovegan.com, so you've got both the theory and the practical help together.
And then vegan nutrition. Lovely. Look at the colors. That's absolutely
open it up. That is just, I mean, people would want to open that and read it, wouldn't they?
Indeed.
If you're sitting on the bus reading that, don't you think people would want to look at that more? I think that's such an appealing pamphlet.
Yeah. And it's nice because, you oftentimes have that conversation with people say, yeah, but if I go vegan, I will die. I will not, I will not get good nutrition. I will be, I will be weak. I will become ill. And you've got your, you've got your pamphlet right here and it also points them to, various other sites that they can, where they can get information about nutrition. Nice. Very nice job here. Then being fair means going vegan. Part of what vegan advocacy is presentation of veganism in simple ideas. Really, this is not rocket science. This is just being vegan means you don't beat up on animals. You don't victimize vulnerable, innocent beings just because you can, because, you're able to do it because you're stronger or because, you're just more horrible in terms of your moral nature, and you're able to do stuff. And it's a nice pamphlet to get people to think about what veganism means. And so, we all want to be fair. What does that mean? Animals suffer because we use them. Being fair means going vegan. Simple ideas, but just getting people to focus on these simple moral ideas. This is made from an essay Anna and I did a few years ago that we got a tremendous reaction to in a European magazine. And it's called Under 5 Minutes Will Show You That You're Committed to Veganism. So basically, the point of that article was to say, look, we all think that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals. And yet, we all consume animals and we all use them in situations which are transparently frivolous and not necessary. And so we all believe, or most of us believe, that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals. Well, that commits us to veganism. And that was the point of that article, which Francis has now made into a pamphlet. And it's pretty good.
And basically, that's sort of a conversation you can have with somebody.
Absolutely.
That's written down, but you could have it verbally. And those are the sorts of conversations that we set out in the Advocate for Animals book as model conversations that could form the basis of ones that people would feel comfortable having with when they do their advocacy. So this is a fantastic resource for people. I'm so grateful that they were done.
And look, print these things out, put them in offices where you're sitting, in doctors' offices, and obviously people don't want you to do that. But people leave literature in places all the time. Leave this literature in places. When you're on the bus, ostentatiously take out a pamphlet and read it.
It doesn't. There's a bit of theater involved in all this stuff, right? Non-animal book. Give me a brochure here. You see, you just use it as a bookmark. So you're reading your thing and you take it out and you're holding your book and like this, it's.
If you're on a train, for example, and you take your book out,
room, you're on the bus.
You're on a train. Someone's sitting across from you.
Right.
You take out your book.
Watch the eyes go to
you
your
remove
pamphlet.
You remove the thing, and then you're reading the book. You're holding that up, and someone says, "Are you vegan?" Well, yes. How did you know? And then you've got you can have a conversation. So I think these, then we have the Abolitionist Approach pamphlet, which is also available online, which talks about the 6 principles, and that's now in I don't know, 20 some odd different languages. It's in a lot of different languages. So whatever language it is that you speak, I mean, we don't have all the languages, but most of the languages that, that you might want to access a pamphlet to, you can get on our approach.com. All these pamphlets are on abolitionistapproach.com and howdoigovegan.com, and they're all free. And, all you have to do is just print them out. And there you go. So I'm really excited about these things. I'm grateful to Francis for doing them. And, they're really useful advocacy tools. And remember something, each of us, an idea will come back to again and again and again and again and again. Each of us, if we're going to change the world, each of us has got to participate. This isn't a situation of, hey, you do it. It's a question of we all have to do it. And these sorts of resources make that a lot easier.
Sorry.
Sorry, Anna. I understand that these new pamphlets are also available in Spanish. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh, are they all in Spanish? I know that one of them.
Are they all in Spanish? Not yet, but they will be.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Christina Kuipers, who is heading up our Spanish language division, with 3 other people, 3 right now, but we hope more. And she's in the process of generating a lot of literature in Spanish. She's helping with, and indeed is heading up the howdoigovegan.com Spanish project. And so yeah, they'll all. I mean, I know I 1 or 2 of them I know is in Spanish. Christina's already done. But I assume she's working on all of them, and she's also going to be getting the Animal Rights, the Abolitionist Approach. That's going to be out in another few weeks. She's just checking the translation that was originally made, and she's making a few changes here and there, and she's going to get that out. I'm hoping shortly. But we're very excited because the number of people who speak Spanish is huge.
Oh, sure.
And
and there are very few resources.
And there are very few resources
so.
Presently available. So we're going to try to remedy that.
That's great. Well, thanks for that. We'll move on now and get you to answer some questions. To get us started, we've got 1 or 2 from previous webinars, and give people who are viewing this webinar a chance to get involved and ask a few questions. Something you just said leads me on very nicely to the first question. You were talking about everybody should go out and be a leader. Everyone should go out and do advocacy. And we have a question from Taylor. I don't know where Taylor is from because we didn't get those details. But Taylor says she's very busy with work and family life, and she has little time to do advocacy herself. Is donating to support full-time activists money well spent?
No. No. I think actually that's a very bad thing to do. If we want to change the world, each of us has to participate. Now, we'll all have different ways of participating, and we'll all do different sorts of things. But we all need to do those things. And don't underestimate, just because you're not speaking to large numbers of people, because your audience is basically the people you work with or the people you go to school with or your circle of family and friends. I keep saying, if everybody who is presently vegan gets 1 other person in the next year to go vegan, and we all did that, the world would be vegan in about 15 years, the entire planet. That's not going to happen. But the exponential power, of a movement. I mean, of individuals doing things, of a grassroots movement, the ability to really exponentially extend the idea and the theory is incredible. So just get out there and do it, and it's really important. And I think it's a very bad idea. And that it's sort of related, Alan, to the problem of what we're seeing right now. Activism, all social movements go through periods. And we're in this period right now, what I call instant activism, where people are not expected to educate themselves so that they can go out and educate others. They just need to show up and be part of some show, some spectacle. And whether it's showing up and witnessing and stopping a truck on the way to the slaughterhouse, or whether it's going into a restaurant and, you know, yelling, it's not food, it's violence, or whether it's standing in a geometrical shape wearing a mask, holding a computer, showing slaughterhouse footage or whatever. The present approach to animal activism is characterized by what I call instant activism. Don't worry about it. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to know a damn thing. Just show up and be a prop in someone else's show. That's a recipe for disaster, particularly when someone else doesn't know what the hell he or she is talking about, which is often the case with these events, or where the message that's given is incredibly confused. So, you know, if you've got people who are the people who are speaking are not terribly educated or knowledgeable about the theory of abolition, and you have people who are standing there as props for, you know, the spectacle, who don't know anything, then this is really just not a very, very good idea. And so, and that sort of feeds into this idea that, well, you don't need to know anything. You just show up and, you know, have somebody who's paid to be an activist, a professional activist, a careerist, be the person who's, you know, running the show, either, you know, at the local level, or there's somebody sort of, you know, on the national level who sort of is controlling the content of the message. And I'm telling you, we have been doing this now for, I don't know, 30, I guess, since we went vegan. So, you know, we weren't really sort of active before 1982-ish or so. But I've never seen that work out well. Whenever you have as a matter of fact, one of the main reasons why the movement has failed, there's a bunch of reasons, but one of the main reasons why is because of careerists, because of people who are, you know, who have this as a job and go to the public and say, give me money so that I can do this. Well, you know, you don't need to, you know, this is not rocket science. If you go to the public and you ask them to fund your speech, basically what happens is you end up saying the things that you think your donors want to hear. And in a world where veganism is a minority position and abolitionist veganism is an even smaller segment within the general vegan category, you're not going to get a whole lot of people who are going to, you know, going to want you to promote the abolitionist message. They're going to want you to promote the, well, you know, I don't want to be judgmental, and if you want to eat cage-free eggs, and it's okay. That's the sort of message you're going to promote.
And we really do need to be redefining what advocacy is.
Absolutely.
Because I think we're still in the early days of vegan advocacy, certainly abolitionist vegan advocacy. A lot of us have come to realize the problems of the large charities and them being the face of people who are interested in animal issues at whichever point they're at. We're not making progress if we just then replace it with another sort of structure that's at arm's length and separate from everyone else's lives. I repeat what I always say, that I am confident that the most important sort of activism, the most effective advocacy, is people talking one-on-one with people in their community, with their sphere of influence at work and within their own families,
Absolutely.
At their church, at their school or something. Because if people know you and have confidence that you're an otherwise decent person, they are much more open to what you're saying than if you're standing apart from them, if you're criticizing them, if you're going at, you know, people recoil and stand back if you're either yelling at them, if you're asking them for money, anything that sets them apart, anything that makes them take that literal step or emotional or an intellectual step back. We want people to engage on it and have an opportunity to follow up. This is the history of other movements. This is how change came on race and other issues. Heaven knows we have a long way to go, but that's how the important changes in society happened, and that's how they will happen here. I was so pleased this morning. I'll tell you a little anecdote. I got an email this morning from my friend Marlene Watson-Terra, and she runs that wonderful macro vegan website that we feature so often on the Abolitionist Approach website. And anyone who has questions on nutrition should go and see the work that Marlene Watson-Terra and her spouse Bill Terra do. Fantastic resource. But she sent me a picture of her 92-year-old mother who has gone vegan and is now an activist and advocate at 92. And she's out there talking about it. She's a wonderful example for everyone because she's so excited and bright and enervated. Who wouldn't want to be like Marlene's mother at 92? But
most of us will be just happy to be alive at 92.
Treats with people. And I saw this morning her given back and forth with a group of women in Detroit who were inspired by her. I mean, you don't know what your impact is going to be. So a quick shout out to Marlene's mother today. Thank you. I hope I'm in that good shape at 92. Heaven knows I'll still be advocating if there's a breath in my body. But I hope by then we will have made some more progress because everybody will have taken on the individual responsibility of doing that. Now, Taylor, I can imagine, has got a busy schedule and she's got work commitments and family commitments, but she talks to people. She meets people. She has friends and relatives. And she has the opportunity to influence them. And she's got a bunch of new flyers for people. So advocacy isn't, standing in the street necessarily. It isn't tabling necessarily. It's everyday conversations because being an abolitionist vegan is the core of who you are. So that's what you present to the world.
What was interesting was somebody sent me a video of a guy giving a talk in an Australian university, and he's asked about the abolitionist approach. And he says, well, the problem with abolition is that they're not trying to change society. They're just trying to change people one at a time. This is a guy who's promoting welfare reform and promoting all sorts of nonsense. And you say, well, we don't really want to change things. We just want to change, we just want to get people to go vegan one at a time. And the answer is, we want people to go vegan. And you should never denigrate the individual going vegan, and you're getting an individual to go, one person to go vegan. Because as I said, if we all did it and we did it year after year after year, then we would have a vegan world. And so, but of course we're trying to change things. Of course we're trying to change society. What we're trying to do is change society in a way that the welfarists and that the single issue campaign people and all of the, the instant activism branding spectacle people have failed to do it because basically, they're doing something different. They're focusing on something different. We're trying to get people to focus on a fundamental issue. It's unfair. It's unjust. It's morally wrong. And I want to say something. I wrote about this morning because this is something I get probably one of the most frequently asked questions is, well, how do you deal with people who say, yeah, but you're being judgmental? And the answer is, well, of course I'm being judgmental. You can't do morality. There is no such thing as morality without judgments because morality is about making moral judgments. Now, we shouldn't be judging individuals. That's not our role. But we should be judging actions, institutions, practices. That's what we need to do. So you can't sort of say, well, if you're opposed to racism, you're taking a moral position. You can't be opposed to racism without taking the position that being judgmental and saying discrimination based on race is immoral. And so, of course, we're being judgmental. There's nothing wrong with being judgmental. As a matter of fact, there's everything right about being judgmental. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's really bad about society now is that people are afraid of being judgmental. People are afraid of making moral judgments and saying that's wrong because everybody has got their opinion. And the answer is, yeah, everyone's entitled to an opinion. Some people are just wrong. And, yeah, you're entitled. You're entitled to your opinion that you think people of a particular race are inferior. You're entitled to your opinion. You're wrong. You know, you're entitled to think that women have lesser moral value than men. You're entitled to that opinion, but you're wrong. You're entitled to think it's okay to exploit animals, but you're wrong. So it is a matter of, of being judgmental, and as I say, it's not a matter of being judgmental about individuals and going up and saying that they're evil people or they're terrible. But it is a matter of being judgmental and saying something is wrong. And, I saw another video of.
I think judgmental is the wrong word. You're not putting. It has connotations.
Well, you're making
of putting somebody down.
Right. Well,
you're making a judgment about behavior, saying that one thing is better than another.
Right.
So the other one tends to be wrong in that case. But what's also important to remember, I think, in the vegan context, is that a lot of people haven't been exposed to a good presentation about what veganism is. So they haven't had an opportunity to really engage it as they would other ethical principles. So I'm quite happy at this point in society to say, if you've got racist or misogynistic ideas, I'm going to criticize you for that. But most people haven't had a good conversation with someone about veganism, haven't had it presented in an uplifting and positive and accurate way, and they haven't been shown how it's possible for them to integrate those principles in their own life. They think it's weird and strange and difficult, and they'll die and they won't get enough nutrition and it's expensive and all those things. So that's where the individual person can be so important about giving a new perspective on what veganism is. And I want to encourage everybody to do it, because everybody can. Everyone gets nervous and shy and thinks, I can't do that, and it's for someone else. But this isn't for us to be, the audience clapping for someone on stage who inspires you at a conference or something and sends you home gung-ho for something that lasts for 15 minutes and then you settle back into inertia and not contacting people. It's a responsibility that every single one of us has. And some days you're going to be more satisfied with what you did, and you'll come home to think, I could have done that better. So what happens? Next week, you go out and have that conversation and you do it better. And it becomes easier and it becomes clearer, and we all become better advocates. But it's okay to stumble over your words. It's okay to say, I need a moment so I can explain myself properly, or even have a follow-up with someone if they're willing to have a phone or email exchange with someone, or it's someone you meet again at work the next day or something. So everyone can have confidence that they can do it, because it's our individual obligation, but it's also our individual ability.
But I want to go back to the idea, though, of being judgmental, because what is happening, I think, more is this idea that people think that there's something wrong with saying there's something wrong with animal exploitation.
Right.
And that I think we've got to be really clear about. I think it's a very bad idea to be judgmental with respect to individuals. I think, calling people Nazis, calling people Nazis in any context is not exactly going to lead to, happy conversations. But saying to people, you're not a vegan, so you're like a child molester or something like that, that's not useful. Making those sorts of judgments about people, you basically have the moral value of a child molester. It's not really useful. It is important to talk about how animal exploitation is a violation of fundamental rights in the way that other forms of rights violations are violations of rights, like child molestation or murder or other sorts of things. But there are differences because, as Anna mentioned before, animal exploitation is so much a part of the society that people really haven't thought about it in any meaningful way, or any clear way. And the animal groups haven't helped them do that, by the way. If anything, they've gotten them more confused about it. So, it's really important to not be judgmental about individuals, but it is important to be judgmental about the actions, practices, and institutions of animal exploitation. I saw another video where, it was one of these cube things where there's a fellow eating ice cream while he's being, while someone's talking to him. And the guy makes the point while he's eating the ice cream that he thinks he's being hypocritical. And the person he's talking to sort of said, well, no, you're fine. It's fine. It's important to sort of say, look, that thing that you're eating, if you really care about animals, what you're eating is every bit as bad as meat. It's a horrible idea. It really results in dreadful, not that any commodification is not dreadful, but dreadful commodification of cows and objectification and commodification of their relationship with their babies and stuff. I mean, it's dreadful. The veal industry. The veal industry exists because there's a dairy industry. Ice cream. We tend to think of it as an innocuous, food, a great summertime food. Kids love it and stuff like that. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And so it's important to, again, you don't want to say to the guy, I'm not going to talk to you because you're eating an ice cream cone and I think you're evil and I think you're a Nazi and I think you're a child molester. That's not useful. But we ought not to shy away from the idea that, that we ought to be clear with people and, be very clear with people and not sort of, excuse it and say, well, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You're fine. No, it's not fine. And I think we ought to be clear about that. And when somebody's willing to engage us, never, ever, 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 ever be anything but 100% clear.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Back to the this instant activism thing. We've got a supplementary question here from Anne, who's in the room with us tonight. Anne says, what evidence can you provide to convince people who think that this loud activism is the best way to change people's minds?
I'm sorry, convince them that it is or isn't. I don't think it is the best way to change.
No, what can you do to convince people who think that it's not?
Well, I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, with the stuff about the witnessing of the slaughter, I think the business about witnessing slaughterhouse, stopping the trucks on the way to the slaughterhouse to quote witness, be witnesses or whatever for the animals, I think that's positively harmful to animals. And I've had people say to me, well, but the animals really, they know you're trying to bond with them. And I have news for you. Animals in a truck on the way to the slaughterhouse are terrified. People who believe that they're stopping the trucks and they're sticking their hands in the trucks or offering the animals water or crying while they're taking selfies and stuff, that stuff does not help animals. That just increases it prolongs the time that they are in utter terror, and I think it's really very harmful. I think that whole save phenomenon, it disturbs me because it is so incredibly counterproductive. And so much about the individuals involved. It's about, and again, I'm not saying these people aren't sincere, or that they're bad people. I'm just saying I think they're wrong, and I think that they're not taking into account that they're dealing with animals who are terrified, and they're prolonging that terror, and they're not really, they're not really the idea that they're comforting the animals or that they're doing something positive for the animals. That's a fantasy. That's a complete fantasy that they're talking themselves into. That they're somehow, they're somehow being the angel. That the last positive experience these animals have. That's just crazy, frankly.
Well, I think I think what it is that people who favour activism like cubes and disruptions and these bearing witness and so on, they do say, well, these things make people go vegan. People go vegan because of them, and I think they think that this is the most effective way to make people go vegan, as opposed to the kind of vegan education you're talking about, or we're talking about.
I'm sure they can point to someone who's gone vegan because of that.
You can point to somebody who's gone vegan
almost anything,
for
and
anything, right?
Good or bad experiences can have results. The point is, what is the most effective and the most efficient and the most lasting way of influencing people? And I do understand how the recognition of the necessity of going vegan can be a very emotional thing. And, you look back and you think, how on earth could I have ever participated in this? And,
right.
and you want to shed everything that you've ever done and thought about. You've got some guilt for the years that you've done it. You want to tell your family about it. You want to you want them to agree with you. Yeah. You don't understand why they don't. There's a lot of raw emotion right on the surface. So I can understand how it kind of often leaves us flailing around trying to attach that to something that you think is going to make a difference. And so really like an action that mirrors the rawness of the emotions that can be involved in this. But I think we need to always focus on what's involved here and the fact that we are here to represent the interests of animals, who are the victims here. And so we can have strong emotions, but we're not the victims. And I think we need to get ourselves out of the center of this theater and do the hard work, and sometimes exercise some self-restraint and do the plodding everyday work of changing attitudes about veganism. It's not always exciting. It doesn't involve theater. It's not an afternoon's entertainment sometimes, even though it involves crying and strong emotions. It's not all get together and do an event. It's stay home, learn something, practice something, go talk to somebody. I think that's really where we'll get a better result.
I think one of the really serious problems, though, is all that quote activism. Again, it encourages people to not be activists themselves. So they can go to the Save event, or they can go to the Direct Action Everywhere, event, or to the whatever event, the Cube event, and they haven't learned. These are people, they haven't educated themselves, so they're not capable of talking to people. And I've had experiences of talking with some of these folks after these events or at these events, and most of them don't know any. I mean, they're confused. They're confused, and people need to educate themselves. What we're dealing with is a paradigm that has existed for thousands of years, and it's deeply ingrained. And I mean, animal exploitation is a deeply, rests on some anthropocentric views, which are very, very deeply ingrained in our thinking. And if we're going to upset those, if we're gonna uproot them and replace them with something else, we need to have some powerful tools. We need to, we need to be educated. We need to educate ourselves. And part of what all of these forms of activism do is to encourage people not to do that. So just show up, hey, you want to have say Saturday afternoon, you got nothing better to do? Well, show up and let's stand in a geometrical pattern, or, come on over and let's witness at the slaughterhouse, or, or let's go into a restaurant. And I mean, I have to tell you, when I see these things, these videos where people are sitting in a restaurant and then they order human, like the service person, the service person goes up and takes their order, and they start saying, well, I want a human leg, or I want this, or I want that. And then they proceed to scream and fall over. I mean, all that does is reinforce the view that vegans are nuts. And we don't want, I mean, why do we want to reinforce that view? I mean, I understand the idea that what we want to do is get people thinking about stuff, but you don't get people thinking in there. Well, some people think, yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to say no one will think, but as a general matter, that is not a productive way of educating people. This is something that is not going to be changed by, falling over in a restaurant screaming, or showing somebody a gory photo. Do you think people have never seen gory photos of animal exploitation? I realize some people think that these things came into existence last week, but the gory stuff's been around forever, and we still don't have a vegan world. So, like, this idea that, well, when people see the footage, one of the problems with a lot of that stuff is people see the footage, if they haven't really thought through the issue and no one's educated them, they see the footage and their first reactions to say, well, we ought to stop that. We ought to somehow change that. And then that's exactly why we have a welfare movement. That's exactly why we have a welfare movement.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, I suppose that the bottom line of all this is that nobody ever went vegan unless somebody spoke to them about veganism.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not cut out the middleman and go cut directly to the chase?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, right, complete change of topic now. This is a question from Shamil, who says, I've noticed that quite a few vegans strongly support so-called clean meat. How should abolitionists respond when they're asked about this stuff?
Clean meat ain't vegan. Clean meat involves basically taking cells from animals, growing them in media that are made, that consists of animals, and so it's not vegan. First of all, secondly, it just reinforces this whole idea that somehow if we don't have meat, we're deprived. Thirdly, I do not understand. I saw an essay recently written by my friend Phil Wollen in Australia, and I like Phil very much, but I think Phil's just dead wrong on this. He talks about how, well, people who don't want to go vegan, they'll respond to this, to this cultured meat business. And my view is, look, we already have tons of fake meat out there, the soy meats and the tempeh meats and all that sort of stuff. And anybody, that hasn't resulted in a vegan world because, it's not that, anybody who really wants to continue eating meat-like products because they like the texture or the flavor or whatever, the stuff that's out now is actually frightening. I don't eat that stuff. For lots of different reasons, one of which is it grosses me out because it's so much like meat that it makes me, I find it nauseating. But there's plenty of stuff out there, and it's incredible in terms of it mocks the texture. Mock meat. It mocks the texture. It mocks the flavor. It really is quite remarkable. And so, to the extent that somebody says, "Look, I just can't eat this vegetable stuff. It's just not, it just doesn't strike me as being, I need something that if I don't feel that I'm having a meal if I don't have something meat." Well, if that's your scene, then you got plenty of the fake meats to eat. And so I don't think that, that the cultured thing, the cultured meat is going to somehow be a magical answer. I realize a lot of people are investing in that. There are a lot of animal people, including a lot of vegans, who are investing money in that stuff. And, some of them have even gone into the business of making this stuff and using animal cells and calf serum and stuff to grow the cultures. And it's not vegan. This stuff you have to have a constant supply of animals from which you take the cells. And then you have to have some sort of medium in which the cells are cultured. All of this involves animals, but it's also reinforcing this whole idea that somehow, we're all deprived if we're not eating meat. We got to get away from that. We really have to get away from that. And I think, the idea that we're ever going to have any supply of this stuff that's going to be in any way cost effective, at sometime in the near future is fanciful. And it wouldn't deal with, you're still going to have tons of animals being used for eggs and for dairy and things. It's not a solution to the problem. If people really feel that strongly about meat, they have the mock meats that they can eat right now. And they can go to the store and they can get those. They're not cultured. They're not, they don't involve, killing animals. I find them disgusting, but if you like that sort of thing, they're great.
Yeah. I think also that, clean meat is going to happen or not happen, regardless of whether vegans support it or not. Right. We really don't need to compromise our ethics for that in any way, shape or form.
Yep.
Exactly.
And the other thing that sprung to mind when I was thinking about this was that if we say, well, there's a little bit of exploitation is okay in this instance, it's a bit of a slippery slope because when you can say, well, a little bit of exploitation in some other area is okay, So I think it's a dangerous thing to do, and we don't even need to do it, really, do we?
You're right.
But we have got a supplementary question from Maynard, who says, what about clean meat to use as pet food? I think he's thinking of cats, obviously, another sort of carnivorous animal.
Well, first of all, with dogs, there's no problem. So, I mean, let's just be clear about that.
6 vegan dogs.
We have 6 vegan dogs, and
some of whom were brought back from the brink.
Exactly.
On a vegan diet, so they thrive.
And so there's no problem with dogs. And with most cats, we have lots of friends. We don't have any cats because when you have 6 dogs, having a cat in the house would
more chaos.
Would increase the level of chaos even more than we presently have. Yeah, and we did actually once rescue a cat from an abandoned house. We saw the cat, and we went and we got the cat, and we had the cat in the house with us for a few days when we had, I think, 5 dogs, and it was unbelievable. And we actually had to put the cat in a room because it wasn't fair to the cat. The cat was being chased. It was dreadful. And so I don't really know very much about cats, and we've never lived with cats apart from that brief time. But we have plenty of friends who have cats, and they have vegan cats. And there's this idea that some males will develop crystals, and particularly males will develop crystals if they don't have don't have meat foods. Apparently, from what I understand from my vet friends, some male cats will develop crystals no matter what they eat, because they do that. And I think you have to be smart about it, and that if you have cats and you're going to get them on a vegan diet, I think you need to do some testing, to make sure that their acid alkaline ratios and whatnot are appropriate. But no, I don't think we should be developing cultured meat for cats. I think what we ought to be doing is doing everything we can to get our cats on vegan diets, and not supporting yet another animal-based source of stuff for cats. I think we ought to do the best we can to get our cats to be vegan. And I think, as I say, based on what I understand from my friends who have cats, it's possible most of the time. It may not be possible all of the time, in which case I don't think it's ever morally justifiable to feed animals to other animals. It may be excusable in the sense that it's morally wrong, but what the hell are we supposed to do? In which case, my view is you buy the cheapest cat food you can find, because that stuff is generally not resulting in more animals being killed, because it literally is slaughterhouse sweepings. But I do have to say this. What I do not understand about this argument that cats need meat, what they need is taurine. And in a lot of these cat foods that have, as I understand it, in most of the canned cat foods, they have added taurine anyway, because the meat's so over-processed. There's no natural taurine in the meat anymore because it's been processed. So they add taurine. Well, you can get vegan taurine. So I don't understand this argument that I really don't. And again, I'm not a veterinarian, and maybe I'm missing something here, but it seems to me that given that the taurine is supplemented anyway, because the meat-based foods are so, or the fish-based foods, or whatever you're feeding the animal, is already so processed that the taurine that exists is gone. So it has to be added, it has to be supplemented. I don't understand why it's any different to take the vegan taurine and add it to the vegan food, and and the cat's getting the taurine. Now we have friends who do that and who have perfectly healthy cats. I mean, my guess is, and we've heard from some of them, that there was a period of transition where it took a while for the cat to get used to it, and they had to give the cat, they had to wean the cat off of the meat foods and wean the cat onto the vegan foods and stuff. But I mean, I know we have very few friends. We have some who still feed meat or fish or whatever to their cats, and and we all basically look at it the same way. It's not right. It's wrong. But it's like a lifeboat situation. I mean, animals look. domesticated animals make moral messes that we can't clean up in a very tidy way all the time. And it's not right, but sometimes you don't really have choices.
Okay. Right, complete change of subject now. This is a question from Marisol, who says, there's a question about your Tom Regan article.
Yeah.
Marisol says, why do you think that Tom rejected the rights position and embraced working with new welfarists?
Well, that's interesting.
Long story.
It's a long story, right? Tom didn't reject
the short version.
Yeah, Tom didn't reject the rights position. What he did do was that he was of the view in the late 80s to the mid 90s that there was an inconsistency between that if you were a rights advocate, there were certain things you couldn't, that basically the people who were promoting welfare reform or single issue campaigns of a particular sort were not acting consistently with the rights position. And then in the article that I wrote in Between the Species, in which I discuss and actually to some degree document, because I still have quite a few of those materials from those days. But you see the transition where Tom is basically very, very much of the view that rights advocates should not be working with welfarists and others. And this was the position that he and I were taking. This is where new welfarism comes from, that basically the rights people who are working for welfare reform and for other things, we call them new welfarists. I call them new welfarists. And he agreed with that very strongly. And then I think, why did Tom change toward the later 90s and start saying, well, we can all work together? Made no sense given what he had said before. And the answer to that is, I don't know. And now Tom is dead. I will never find out. I suspect that what Tom was reacting to, I suspect strongly, was that the reaction of animal people to the rights position and to the rejection of welfarism was nasty. Animal people are can be really nasty people, and in part because many of them are consequentialists in the sense that they think that what they're doing is important. It's God's work. And if somebody disagrees with them, they're harming animals. So it's okay to say whatever they want to say about them. That's a fairly common and unfortunate fact about the animal movement. And it got nasty in the mid 90s when, because up into the mid 90s, there was a discussion going on and about rights versus welfare. And it was a real active discussion. Some things happened in 95 and 96 that changed that. And the large organizations made it clear they didn't want to have that discussion anymore. So, and then things started getting ugly. And people started, you see this sort of conduct with people in the movement these days. But it was a particular sort of nastiness directed. It was people just didn't want to have that discussion. They found it to be, they didn't want to have it. would you agree?
First of all, I don't know if Marisol's read the article from Between the Species, but I would encourage her and anyone else who's interested in this to the link is on the Abolitionist Approach Facebook page, certainly. And we can put that up again because this is really too much of a subject to deal with, just in the webinar here. And I found it very interesting to read Gary's synopsis of that time because it was an important span of time and an important time for the movement, and it was a pivotal point of the movement. But as Gary was saying, the American movement has always been underpinned by Peter Singer, a version of Peter Singer's utilitarian approach, because that has always been provided a long list of animal welfare single issue campaigns that the old groups and then the new groups could engage with and campaign on and fundraise off. So there's always been that tension between the groups who were saying, hey, this gives us something to work on, and the people who were taking a rights approach. So there's always been that tension. And as Gary was saying, there wasn't a great deal of welcoming for the people taking the rights position. There was among the grassroots activist people, but not with the organizations. No. And at that time, if this happened now, it might be different because there's different access, just like this webinar. You can reach people differently. But at the time, the groups had the stranglehold through their mailing lists and the direct mail and the large conferences and stuff. So they could freeze people out, and they tried very hard to do so. And it got nasty and it got predictably vicious. And I think Tom Reagan found that very hard to deal with. So he made some decisions that I didn't agree with, and Gary will explain in his article why he didn't agree with it. It's a shame, because I think the movement could have been moved along further than it would. I think it would have been 20 years ahead of where it is now if things at that time had moved out differently. Yeah. But I said that this is a big vista that we're looking at of what happened, and I would encourage people to look at that article. It's very interesting in Between the Species. Yeah.
It's a very interesting subject, not least of all because I get the impression that a lot of people who are engaged in the activism type of activism that we've been talking about have really not looked into the history of animal rights.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That is the understatement of the century.
Sorry about that. And it really is a good thing to know where all this has been going on and how long it's been going on, because you get the impression that some people think that animal rights only started 3 years ago,
right.
And of course it didn't. It's been going, as 40 years at least. It's a good subject for people to read up on. I think it's very worthwhile for anyone.
Part of the problem is that people think, as you point, is that this whole issue started last week. And so they say, well, but you got to take steps, or you got to do that, I mean, they're acting as if there hasn't been, as you point out, 30, 40 years of history about this. I mean, people have been. I remember, Alan, when I first got involved with this, and the fur issue was the big big issue. The fur industry is stronger now than it was back then. And, everyone was thinking, well, you got to focus on fur. And I remember thinking, well, what the hell is the difference between, even before I developed a lot of the stuff that I went on to develop, I would say, well, I don't understand what's the difference between fur and leather and wool and stuff. And people would yell at me, would say, well, it's, we don't need to talk about that now. And so, it's never been a movement of clarity in large part, because it has always been associated with businesses, right. Whether they're charitable businesses or whether they're non-charitable, they're businesses. Charities are businesses; they're just nonprofit. And it doesn't mean people don't make a lot of money. It just means it doesn't turn a profit. But people are making money. People are being paid sometimes quite large salaries. And so, but I think part of the problem's always been and continues to be that these organizations are businesses.
And they don't need you to be informed
right.
or educated.
They don't want
about
you to be
something.
Informed.
All they want you to do is be emotional about it or outraged about it. And so many people in the animal movement then and probably now had a copy of Peter Singer's Animal Liberation on their shelf. They'd opened it. It had pictures. If that book did not have pictures,
nobody would have read it.
I know it would not have had the impact that it did, because everyone opened up, looked at the pictures. Perhaps they hadn't seen it before. We have to remember this is in the 70s that this came out, and there wasn't as much information that had been commonly available. And they look at this picture and they think, I don't like that. And then they say, okay, someone fix it. And someone sends them a mail and says, send us your $15 and we will fix it on your behalf. And you never read the rest of the book, because you didn't need to, because someone said, I'll do it on your behalf. So it's bizarre how many times I've seen reactions from people when people are talking about utilitarianism. Gary's been talking about utilitarianism and Peter Singer's theories. Like, what are you talking about? He doesn't believe animal rights. Why are you insulting Peter Singer? What's wrong with you? Yeah. The man is a utilitarian. He doesn't believe in rights generally for humans or animals.
Right.
So we have to have more engagement, more responsible engagement with the idea so that we can talk about it sensibly and take on the responsibility ourselves to be advocates. We're not sending someone the $15 through the donate button anymore. It's even easier now because you don't need to send them a check. You just press the button and there we are. But it's taking the responsibility from us. So we never had to clarify our ideas. So as I said, if someone's interested in this subject, go and read that essay in Between the Species. It's a walk through 20 years and what happened and how we don't do it again.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for that. It's very interesting. Okay. Question from Laura, who says, what is your view on the present rise in supposed vegan and plant-based diets as opposed to veganism proper? Will it benefit the abolitionist movement in any way, or is it a mere fleeting trend?
Who knows? I think a lot of interest in veganism is focused on health. And, I mean, look, I'm happy people are eating, I to the extent that somebody's eating, fewer animals or whatever, I'm happy. I'm not going to promote the idea of reducitarianism or whatever, because I think it's fundamentally corrupt. But I think a lot of people are eating fewer animal products because they're worried about health issues. Will that be sustained? I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's not, the only way you're going to really get, it's interesting because there is a confluence of things now. There is an increased interest in health. There is a recognition, and it's reinforced every single day, about how animal agriculture is an ecological disaster, and that the single most important thing you can do, the single most significant thing you can do if you care about global warming, is to go vegan.
The easiest thing.
And the easiest thing, exactly, is to go vegan. I just get such a charge out of people who will spend interminably long periods of time, separating their garbage and making sure that, this is in this bag and that's in that bag. And then they eat animal products, which I just find bizarre beyond belief. But I think, some people, an increasing number of people, I think, are recognizing that they can't help it because the data that are coming out now are absolutely clear that animal agriculture is an ecological disaster. The health material that's coming, the information about health that's coming out now. Anna just sent me an article yesterday from the Lancet, which is the British journal, the leading British medical journal. It's a very prestigious journal, and they had an essay about how high quality carbs will actually increase your life, and that following the paleo diet will decrease. You'll have a shorter lifespan. And so I think increasingly people are becoming aware of health, the health aspects of a plant-based diet, but I also think that a large number of people are getting the justice idea that there's something, because remember something, veganism is more than just what you eat. It's what you eat, what you wear, what you use. And I think, the health issue doesn't address wool. The environmental issue is not focused on anything except, the dietary aspect of it. But it's veganism understood as an ethical idea, particularly the abolitionist vegan position, which focuses on all eating, wearing, or using of animals, and that it's unjust. And I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people see that, and for an increasing number of people, they're beginning to see that. And understand that they've been sold a bill of goods. That it's that veganism is not an extreme thing. What's extreme is that non-veganism. Non-veganism involves violating fundamental moral principles that they agree with, they may be confused about, but that they basically agree it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals. Well, if you believe that, you're committed to veganism. And that it's unhealthy and that it's an ecological disaster. So I think an increasing number of people are seeing that. I don't know if, I don't know, whether or not, there's really no way to know whether or not, a lot of this stuff is, or aspects of it are trendy. I just don't know. Right. You just don't know.
I think it's, you'll find a lot of people who are, I don't find a lot of people who are actually vegan for health reasons. I mean, predominantly vegan or something, but it's not.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It's not in every circumstance. Well, first of all, you're talking about a diet, as you're saying, not other aspects of your life and consumption. It's helpful because there will be more people, will know more people who have followed a plant-based diet and haven't had any medical problems, and perhaps even had some improvements in their health. So it makes foods that one would eat as an abolitionist veganism less strange and odd and perhaps intimidating or something. So perhaps if people have more experience of people who are not eating animal products, it makes it less of a hurdle to get over when they're presented the ethical argument. But they still need to be presented the ethical argument for it to stick and become an abolitionist veganism argument.
In the 36 years I've been doing this, I have never, ever, ever met anybody who is a dietary vegan consistently for health reasons, or is a dietary vegan because for health reasons, that's all they're going to be is a dietary vegan. And I've never met somebody who is a dietary vegan for ecological reasons. The only people I've known over these years, and I've known lots of them, who are consistent vegans, they don't eat them, they don't wear them, they don't use them, are people who have got the ethical, who understand the ethical aspect of it.
I mean, I guess the only way it would really benefit abolitionist veganism is if people who went on a plant-based diet or whatever for health reasons, eventually that somehow led to being a vegan in the true sense. And I think that's one of the arguments that reducitarians employ. They maintain that happens. People go plant-based and they suddenly see the light as regards to ethical veganism. Personally, I don't buy that, but I guess some people do. But I don't think it's a.
Well, the lead carnival barker for the reducitarian thing, the guy who's I forget his name. He's not a vegan, so it hasn't worked for him.
Well, he wants to change the definition of veganism to suit his argument. So I mean that can work, can't it?
That's right.
Well,
okay.
Well, I guess you can do it that way too.
They can go and do their thing. We're plodding along relentlessly with abolitionist vegan advocacy.
Just getting back to the previous topic, we've got a supplementary question from Anne, who asked about the street theatre. She says her local activists are focused on SICs and street theatre. Do you have the most tactful way to explain that this is counterproductive? In other words, what will be your tactful argument to these people?
You mean to the people who are engaged in that stuff?
Yeah.
My experience is you can't talk to those people.
Yeah, they're probably not at a place where
they're not. You can't talk to them.
I think for the reasons that they got attracted to that way of doing it, it's the the emotion and that perspective is very strong. You're probably not going to talk them down from it, as it were. But I hope something will rub off and they'll change their tactics. I mean, I don't think it's the best way of educating.
There was a few weeks. I mean, just take a look at my page sometime to see like how perverse some of these discussions get. I mean, all you have to do is in any way say this is really not a good idea, and you don't have to like call them names or question their integrity, but just say, look, this just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I made the point about two people who like went up to the Everest or something and were wearing masks and holding computers, and I said, this is just bizarre. I mean, what are we talking about? This is not, this is branding. This is, whatever it is, but it's not. I mean, this is not. We're to the extent that we're saying this is what activism is. We're really, I think, in many ways, doing a disservice to activism. And I instead of getting a discussion about this, I got 83 million people showed up on the page, whom I banned because, they just basically, started calling people names, calling me names, but, calling other people who disagreed with them names. And, it's very hard to get people to get those people to have a discussion about stuff. The irony is the difficulty is not talking to the public about veganism. They understand it. They may not go, they may not become vegans, but you can have every day of my life, every single day, I have discussions with sometimes larger groups, sometimes smaller groups about veganism. Easy to do. I can start a conversation with somebody about veganism.
Anytime, any circumstance.
Right. If you stand still long enough, I will start a conversation with you about veganism.
You see the room clearing when you come in. Oof, everyone's gone.
Exactly. If you stand still long enough, I'm talking to you about veganism. The people who are the problems are the animal people. Those are the people who are the problems. So when you say to somebody, geez, you think this is a really good idea, it's like they get angry, they call you names. It's bizarre, they accuse you of things. It's ridiculous.
This is such a serious idea, such an important idea, and there's so much work to be done. We just need to step away from the gimmickry. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people go with the best of intentions and everything, but that modality is gimmickry. So it's not necessarily exciting. It's not something that you want to videotape. It's not theater. It's everyday explanation of this important idea and following through so that it sticks with people and changes people.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it's discussions with street theatre fans are very difficult to have, and
right.
So I think we can't really help Anne out too much here. I think we've got to do it to see exactly how difficult it actually is.
Look, okay. Activism, if you do it right, is really hard work. It ain't entertainment.
Right.
And that one of the problems is that, these street theater approaches, or whether it's the Save movement, or whether it's the DXE people, or whether it's the anonymous people, or whether it's the widget people, whatever they're trying to turn it into entertainment, that it's an event that you participate in. And the answer is activism is very hard. You have to educate yourself about the anthropocentric mess we are in. And you have to be able to address that on different levels with people so that you can get them to see the problem and come out of it. And it's not a matter of entertainment for quote, activists, which is what a lot of this stuff is, entertainment for activists. And it has nothing to do with that. Activism is hard work. And we're living at a time where people think that reading anything longer than a tweet is burdensome. And so, the idea, God forbid, of reading a book or reading anything longer than a tweet I put stuff on Facebook. I swear to God, I can put, people complain about the length.
Me a synopsis?
Exactly.
No, that was the synopsis.
They'll send me a private message. That's a really interesting post. Can you boil it down? And the answer is no, I can't. You're going to have to deal with the 300 words. I understand that, however many words, or 500 words. But I'm not kidding you. I get that sort of response. People say, can't you boil it down? And the answer is no, sorry, can't. These are important ideas. I don't believe they're that they're complicated to the point where you can't explain them. But I'm saying you can explain anything simply. But if you understand something, you can explain anything simply. But I also think that it's a little more complicated than a tweet. And it requires that you spend a little time and discipline yourself and learn something. And, I understand that that's not popular these days with a lot of people. and they'd rather go for the entertainment and the instant activism. I don't have to do anything. I can just show up, put my mask on, or I can show up and go into the restaurant and scream and yell, or I can show up to the middle of the town and put my matching T-shirt on and hold a dead animal, or any one of the the absurd sorts of things that people are doing. It's easy to do. It's you have a sort of sense of a camaraderie. It's a sort of it's a social event. It's got, in my judgment, it's not what activism is about.
Okay, thanks. Just dodging back to the Tom Reagan question earlier, a supplementary question from Holly, who asks, is there a good place to find all the history of the animal rights movement?
No. Unfortunately, there really isn't. Richard Ryder wrote an interesting book called Animal Revolution, but that's now quite old. I think that he wrote that in 1990, maybe even before, but that's pretty old. I mean, Rain Without Thunder, a book I wrote in 96, sort of talked about the history of the movement in the 1990s and how it was sort of going from a rights orientation to a welfare orientation. Unfortunately, there really isn't. A history that there are some books that that deal with or that purport to no, there isn't. There really isn't. I mean,
would there be a website that you're aware of that draws together links to various things that comprise this sort of history? Your books, Tom's books, and this kind of thing.
You should republish the link to the Between the Species.
Yeah,
I think that will be useful for most people to see how the rights idea reared up before and was really quashed in at least attempts were made, and how we can do it differently really this time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll reproduce the link on the Facebook page of the article about Tom, because I do think that I think that is a good sort of snapshot of that time. What's interesting is, history is written by the victors.
That's what I was about to say. You're going I can think of books about campaigns and things like that, but that's for the people who are doing the single issue campaigns, some of which we participated in, but that's not.
Oh God, yes.
That's not where we need to be going forward. Yeah. So there are books about the Silver Spring monkeys, and there are books about things like that, which was not the right approach.
Yeah, history is written by the victors, and basically, the welfare movement, the happy exploitation movement, those are the people who are those are the organizations with the money, and much of what's been written has been written by people who are sympathetic or even involved in those organizations. Just to give you a sense of how messed up it is. I think there are probably a handful of people who know who Louis Gompertz is. Now, Louis Gompertz was an 18th century guy who started an organization in Britain that eventually became the RSPCA. But when he started it, I don't remember, I think he called it the English Society for Animal Protection or something like that. But Gompertz was a fascinating guy. He was a vegan. As far as I can tell, he is one of the few really clear, he was a vegan. He didn't think you should wear wool either, but he had he really didn't have a lot of choice. I mean, he wore wool, but he thought it was
no
wrong.
Microfiber at the time.
There was no microfiber.
Probably not a great deal of cotton either.
Exactly. And he was so opposed to animal use that he actually made dramatic improvements on the design. He was an engineer. He was a very smart guy, and he made dramatic improvements in the design of the bicycle, because he refused to ride horses or to ride in carriages that were driven by horses. This guy was ahead of his time by a long time. Most people don't even know who he is. What's interesting is he forms this society, and then he ends up getting thrown out of it because he was a vegan, and everybody was upset about his veganism. And, these were people who liked animals, but they ate animals, and a lot of the more wealthy people who thought fox hunting was just grand and whatnot. And they ended up throwing him out of the society that he helped to found. And the excuse they gave was that you had to be Christian, and he was a Jew. And so they passed some idiotic ordinance that said that if you wanted to be a member of the society, you had to be a Christian. Unfortunately, sorry, Lewis, you're a Jew. Go. And they threw him out. And it's interesting because I don't think I've met more than a handful of people who even knew who Gompertz, who knows who Gompertz is. And so, and it doesn't, in certain ways, it doesn't surprise me, because history is written by the victors, and that, the vegan position is not the position that's prevailed. Even if you look at the history of the vegan society in Britain, okay, the people, Donald Watson is associated, is identified, and I have a lot of respect for Watson, but there were people who were far more radical than Watson, and they're sort of moved out. They're sort of marginalized fairly early on.
And the women.
And the women.
They're all gone.
Well, women are always. But the more progressive. Donald. Don't get me wrong. Donald Watson was a pretty progressive guy, particularly for his time. He was opposed. He was a pacifist. He was against. He was against military service. He was against war. He was a fairly progressive guy. But there were people who, in many ways, were far more progressive than Donald Watson. But when you talk about the history of the vegan society, those people are sort of, they're marginalized. And Donald Watson, who in many ways was more acceptable, becomes the face of it. And so history is, as a way of, we really haven't had, the animal movement has been controlled in large part by largely reactionary forces. Right.
And we haven't really had until now an attempt to have a movement with a strong rights position, an uncompromising rights position at its core. Now, when we go back to the 80s, when the modern animal rights movement in the US and some degree in the UK too got going, it was thoroughly underpinned by Peter Singer's thinking.
Absolutely.
To the point where people actually made fun of Tom Reagan.
Yeah.
No large group sold The Case for Animal Rights. I understand it's a somewhat dense book to read. It's not easily comprehensible for everybody, but Tom's presentations and the Tom and Gary roadshow that went on in the 1980s presented those ideas in very approachable ways. But the main groups did not want to hear that message. Absolutely. I have been in a lot of organizational meetings with people making fun of Tom Reagan, which was really unfortunate. So those ideas did not become the underpinning principles of the movement. And that's why we ended up with new welfareism and that whole fiasco. So we need to get educated, each of us. We need to do that work to get the abolitionist principles thoroughly underpinning our perspective on this. So now each of us can have the opportunity to take this new energy, this new access that we all have, because they could shut Tom Reagan out at that point. They can't shut abolitionist principles out now, because technology brings us into contact with all sorts of people without the institutional barriers. So we can do it this way if everyone shoulders the individual responsibility of education and advocacy.
You can understand why these groups all gravitated to Singer, because Singer's got a philosophy that basically says whatever reduces suffering is a good thing. Well, if you're running one of these organizations, you say, gee, if we increase the size of these cages a millionth of an inch, it will reduce suffering, and boom, and then we'll get Peter Singer to support endless numbers. That was the point I made in Rain Without Thunder, was that when you have a utilitarian perspective, you've got an endless number of fundraising campaigns, because they all arguably reduce suffering, and they all miss the point.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I suppose the answer really is that if you want to get a good, thorough history of the animal rights movement, you've got a little bit of research to do and a little bit of digging around. There isn't a sort of one-stop place that you can go to. But
Yeah.
it's certainly worth doing because it is very interesting.
Yeah, it really is, and I always think that, you know, in my retirement, I might like write a history.
No, we're going to be too busy with doing it now.
Yeah, exactly. But
you know,
on the other hand,
perspective is good, but we know what needs to be done now.
Exactly.
Okay, moving on then. This is a question from Fair or Fur. I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that. What's the abolitionist view on animal sanctuaries? Should we only support those that are 100% vegan and whose only activity or purpose is rescue?
Unfortunately, most sanctuaries become petting zoos. And, you know, you have to understand something. You know, these animals, a lot of these farm animals are, you know, they're not pets. And, you know, they have to be, quote, worked with in order to get them to be friendly to people, or not friendly, because they're not hostile, but to sort of have them, quote, pettable. And what a lot of these sanctuaries do, unfortunately, is they become petting zoos. And I think it's a really, really bad idea. We obviously need sanctuaries, but, you know, any sanctuary that's worth anything is promoting veganism. You know, it's very clearly vegan.
And should generally be open to the public. I mean, perhaps people should be able to go in certain limited circumstances, but you're right, we shouldn't be having
they're petting zoos.
Right.
I mean, you know, these places should not be open to large numbers of people who are coming through all the time. And you know, quote, interacting with the animals. That's exploitative. It's nonsense. Unfortunately, I think that's the model that most of them follow. A real sanctuary should basically be a sanctuary. It should allow the animals to live their lives in peace and quiet and not be climbed on by children or, you know, fawned over by people. I mean, it's a really bad idea. But that also any sanctuary ought to be promoted. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, why we would have a sanctuary that wouldn't be vegan? Unfortunately, I mean, what's really disappointing is when you see these sanctuaries promoting happy exploitation and welfareism and whatnot. It's you know, but these are business. I mean, the bottom line is many sanctuaries, like these organizations, they're businesses. The animals are props in a business. Bad idea.
I think one of the other sad things about this is when you have these sanctuaries and having fundraising events that involve animal products. They have a barbecue and you know, people sit around eating the animals that are in the sanctuary, effectively.
Yes.
I mean, that just makes sense.
Well, you know, it's always been that way. You know, when in the 1980s, when I first got involved with this, I was on the board for a very brief period of time of a shelter, and you know, it was a shelter where it wasn't a no-kill. Well, they didn't even have the concept of no-kill. I mean, certainly animals were not killed unless they had medical problems. They didn't kill for reasons of overpopulation. It was a very small shelter. But they would have these events where they would, you know, have parties, and they would serve spare ribs, and they would serve dairy products, and they would serve all sorts of stuff to raise money so that they could help the animals. And I remember trying to discuss veganism with them and having a reaction. I mean, I quit. I quit because I could no longer stand the absurdity of having the director of the shelter spend X period of time explaining why 2 animals that week had to be killed because they had medical problems, what medical problems they had, how they tried to fix the medical problems. Then they had to end up killing the animal because the animal, you know, was in pain, or the animal had terminal, you know, whatever. And then we would say, okay, fine. Well, you know, the fundraiser next week will be at, you know, Joni's house, and you know, we're going to have veal, and we're going to have, you know, chicken and steak and fish for those people who don't like meat. And I just couldn't get over it. But it's been that way forever. I mean, you know, it's been that way forever. I remember years ago when when we were living in Manhattan, and we were friendly with John Kullberg, who has since died, but he used to be the head of the ASPCA, and he said, it was really horrible when they used to have events. They couldn't, they try to have them in the summertime, because if they had them in the wintertime, everybody came wearing fur coats. Now, I don't think that there's any difference between wearing a fur coat and wearing wool, but or leather or silk or whatever. But it's bizarre. It's what I call moral schizophrenia. We think, we are literally delusional. I mean, in the sense of, that's what schizophrenia is. It's delusion. It's delusional thinking. And we are delusional when it comes to animals. We really are. We are literally delusional. And so we can go to an event where, we're celebrating an organization that, saves dogs and cats, or we think saves dogs or cats. And that at the same time, we're eating animal products or whatever. It just doesn't make any sense. And but the good side of this is people care about animals. That's a good side. Good side is lots of people care lots about animals, but they're confused. And that's what our job is, to unconfuse them, to give them clarity, to help them think clearly about the issues.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I've got a related question here from Chad, and I'm going to change his question slightly, because I think I'm going to divide it into two halves. First of all, do you think that shelters who deal with adoption, and I'm thinking particularly of dogs and cats and animals that are commonly regarded as pets, do you think they should at the same time advocate for the end of domestication?
Yes. What do you mean? I'm not sure I understand.
There's a bit of a dichotomy here, because if you are putting animals up for adoption, you are effectively saying tacitly that it's okay to continue with domestication, because you're giving people animals to domesticate.
No. You got to be clear about that. Yeah. We have animals that are in existence now. They need homes.
Right.
So these are animals that are highly socialized animals, and they're domesticated to the extent that they cannot care for themselves if we don't. They're dependent on us for every aspect of their lives. I love our dogs. They shouldn't exist. I really love them. They shouldn't exist. And so, yeah, I think that shelters, we need to, we should adopt animals. They need homes. They're in this mess because of us. We have an obligation to take care of them. We also have an obligation not to bring any more of them into existence.
Right. So what you're saying is you think that shelters, while they are trying to get animals adopted, they should also take the view and to tell people that domestication is wrong and along the lines.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as responsible breeding.
Right.
It's a fantasy.
I think the majority, I'm sure the majority of shelters now require animals adopted from to be spayed or neutered. I mean, there may be some that don't.
I think most do.
Most do, with a clear message that the situation, is very bad for the animals who are caught up in it. So, but clearly we have to take care of the ones that are here. Yeah. Say the 6 ones at my feet. But,
right. The second part of Chad's question really relates to this advocacy that we were talking about, and whether or not by taking this line they actually spoil their chances of getting animals adopted, because it kind of puts people off adopting them.
What do you mean?
A bit of speculation. If you're advocating that domestication should cease, could that not have the effect of putting off potential adopters, because they then say, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean. I won't adopt a dog or a cat."
But that's not the message. I mean, but that's not the message. I mean, if it puts them off, it's because they've misunderstood the point.
Right. I've seen a few examples of that. People making comments like that on the Facebook pages. Yeah. It's a complete misunderstanding. I'm sure the shelters need to be focusing primarily on getting good homes, where they can pretty much guarantee as much as possible that those animals will have a better future than their past has been. But sure, certainly everyone should be doing it in tandem, where there's a clear message that this is a problem that needs to be addressed and fixed by the end of domestication. So perhaps it's not the most efficient, the best time, I don't know, to have the domestication. You certainly don't want to seem hostile or something to people walking through the door and faulting people for wanting to take an animal away, but there must be a way of them encouraging the efforts to shed light on the problems of domestication.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Chad. If you're still in the room, if I've got that a little bit wrong, please mention it in the chat room, and we'll try and put it right for you. Or I'll
there are particularly in the United States, there are millions. Today, I believe, is Clear Out the Shelters Day. It's an effort,
is it?
Yeah, it's an effort across the country to get some of these animals adopted. So that's a very good thing too. I think a lot of adoption fees have been waived, and there are different ways of getting the animals out to be seen. So we all need to be doing our bit for people responsibly to take on the adoption of an animal if they're in a position to do so responsibly. But it is, a responsibility. The 6 that we have here, many of whom have come from very bad circumstances, are a considerable responsibility. But it's certainly an important part of advocacy too. They're in this mess because of us, and if we're able to make the life of individuals better, because this is about the suffering of individuals, we should be doing it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next question comes from Nicole, and it's about what is necessary and what is unnecessary. And she says, what about people who live off the grid? Does that dictate the necessity of animal use for survival?
What do you mean people live off the grid? You mean people?
Well, I guess there are some people that are perhaps ethnic groups living in circumstances that they find perhaps using animal use necessary and this kind of thing. I guess there are also people who live in countries like the UK, US, who actually live off the grid. In other words, they live apart from society, who may find that they need to use some sort of animal products in order to live off the grid, as it were.
I think part of this is the Inuit question.
Is this the Inuit question?
Well, the Inuit spring to mind, yeah, certainly.
Right. Well, look, it would be a strange lecture, presentation, or animal, focused meeting where the question of what about the Inuit didn't come up, and because
Inuits always come.
You have been posed that question by
Inuits.
people of Inuit extraction. I never have, but I've been posed that question many times from people who live in very comfortable suburbs and have no problems going forward without using animal products, but want to point to that problem as a reason why they shouldn't do it. So that's the usual distraction of that question. There is a real question in there, though, so I'll focus on that one. I think this is a moral imperative for everyone. I understand that it's going to be easier for some people. Talking about domestication, this is Finley. He's not the most comfortable yet. This is Finley, who is a blind and deaf Sheltie, who is a result of breeding where people know that some of the litters will be blind and deaf, but they're so pretty and white, and he's a white color.
What happens is you take a merle and you breed a merle with gray Sheltie with another gray Sheltie, another merle. You try to get a white Sheltie because they make you can charge a huge amount of money. And this guy, 25% of them are blind or deaf or both.
And he's both.
And he was going to be killed. And we took him. He's a lovely boy. Communication with him is a little challenging, I can tell you. But he's a lovely dog. And he's a really lovely dog. But he's a perfect example of what's wrong with domestication. But, I think, first of all, there's a lot of, the Inuits or in a lot of these indigenous groups, it's not that, they're getting flights of they're getting planes going in every day, bringing food and things like that. So, this idea that, they have to, kill whales or whatever, I mean, is nonsense. And so people say, yeah, but wait a minute, it's part of their culture. And the answer is sexism is part of culture. Is that okay? All sorts of bad stuff, genital mutilation is part of some people's cultures. Is that okay? So this idea that something's cultural and therefore you can't criticize it is just bullshit as far as I'm concerned. The issue is whether it's right or wrong. And the fact that it's part of somebody's culture is irrelevant, because everything is part of somebody's culture and everything bad is part of somebody's culture. So, and I mean, again, I think sexism is a perfect example. Sexism is part of culture. It's part of everybody's culture. Does that make it right? And so when you say, well, somebody's living in a situation, I mean, you have to, in a lot of these examples, let me give you an example of something that comes up fairly often. People say, well, wait a minute now, what about poor people in the United States? Isn't it okay for them? I mean, aren't you being racist because a lot of the poor people in this country are people of color? So aren't you being racist if you say that veganism is a moral imperative for them? And the answer is, well, wait a minute now. If I were to say that it's okay if you're a poor person to assault your neighbor to get money because you need it. Your neighbor may need it too, but the point is you need it. And so is it okay to engage in violence towards other people because you are a poor person? Now, I've never met anybody who says, yeah, that's fine. That it's perfectly fine for people to engage in violence to other people and towards other people. Now, I mean, poverty is horrible, and we need a more just and more progressive society where resources are distributed so that people are not in situations of dire poverty. Because really, we would all have to give up so very little. We don't need a communist dictatorship in order to assure everybody has a decent life. If we all gave up a fairly small amount, everybody could live a decent life. And there have been lots of things written about that, about how really, if we all gave up a little bit and we all stopped spending money on killing people and on wasting huge amounts of money on defense and things like that, people can have a decent life. And that's the direction in which we ought to go. And that's the only direction that makes sense in many ways. But this idea that, well, if people are poor, it's all right for them to exploit animals is like saying, well, if they're poor, is it all right for them to exploit humans, to do violent things to other humans? And if the answer is no, it's not, but it's okay for them to do it to animals, then we're just hearing, then that's just speciesism. That's just a speciesist argument. And so, as Anna mentioned, you frequently hear from people, I live in Montclair, New Jersey, which is a very wealthy suburb. It's 12 miles outside of Manhattan. I live in Montclair, but what about the Inuit? And the answer is, well,
I'll be so happy when it's only the Inuit.
Right, exactly.
Everyone else who has ready access to non-animal food is choosing to eat that way. But also, we have to remember that it's much cheaper to have a wholesome vegan diet than a meat-based diet. Obviously, it's a question of access. And all of us should be trying to address the social issues of access within the inequities of society. We've spoken before about the fact that for 30 years we've been teaching at a university in a very poor neighborhood of in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. It's generally a poor city. So access is a challenge, but it's getting better because people are addressing that, because people are seeing the importance of getting wholesome, inexpensive food to more ready accessible to people. So we wrote a little bit about that in the Advocate for Animals, about talking about advocating in poor neighborhoods and perhaps providing some assistance,
and things you can do to help people get decent food.
Working for food justice already in those societies. So we can all do our bit about getting wholesome food into schools and wholesome food delivered to people who are housebound or elderly and that sort of thing. So that's something that we all can work on too.
I'll tell you, Ellen, many years ago when I was first starting in this, I was giving a talk, and some folks from the Inuit tribe or group came to my talk and asked me how it was that I could criticize their killing of animals, and because it was part of their culture. And I said, and they said, because I was not part of their culture, I could not criticize it. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. If child sacrifice were part of your culture, would it be all right for outsiders to criticize? And they said, well, yes, of course. I said, well, then we all agree that outsiders can criticize your culture. It's just we're having a discussion about speciesism. You think that if cultures involve violent actions towards humans, they can be criticized. If cultures don't, if it involves animals, then you can't criticize it. But that's not anything but a statement about speciesism. And and again, I mean, it some of this, can get complicated, but I think it becomes simplistic to the point of being silly when, the reaction to statements about rejecting speciesism sort of get labeled as, well, it's racist, or it's colonialist, or it's this, or it's that. Those are labels which indicate people aren't. I mean, I'm happy to discuss these things with anybody.
They tend to be a way to shut down.
They tend to be a way to shut down.
It's like almost a dare for you to engage because you're being labeled as racist or neocolonial or something like that. Now, the person who's the person who comes from an Inuit background is coming to a lecture in an urban area in Canada or something. It is not exactly tied to the land in that way,
right.
But it's still using, the cultural tradition as a defense. But let's transpose that to plenty of other examples, and we'll see that it wouldn't hold in those. I mean, go and watch Gone with the Wind if you've got some time tonight.
You want to talk about culture?
And let's have a tug on our heartstrings about the culture of the South that was going out.
And that's important. I mean, Gone with the Wind is a perfect example of this, because the whole point of that book and that movie was to sort of
gracious time that's gone.
Yes, it was this time that was gone, that is gone with the wind. It was this slave-based society. It was the old South that had gone with the wind, and it was a celebration, and it romanticized this. I mean, actually, I think Gone with the Wind is one of the most offensive movies that has ever been made.
Right.
And so, all of these things are part of somebody's culture that people, that's valued. And I remember once many years ago being on a radio show, not having to do with animals, in which I was talking about cultural relativism. And I was arguing that, people defend female genital mutilation. And I had people on that radio show arguing with me that female genital mutilation was defensible. I'm sorry, but you cannot, if a woman chooses, whatever that means, to participate in that, that's different. When you're talking about female genital mutilation inflicted on 8-year-old girls, I'm sorry. I don't care what anybody says, that's wrong. And so, and if you're going to be a cultural relativist and say, well, it's right for them, I'm sorry. I mean, that's just silly. I mean, I know it sounds edgy and cool and hip and progressive, but it's not.
No, once you've taken the step of harming someone else, whether human or animal, then other people have a voice and a perspective.
Exactly.
Okay. Do you ever see any circumstances where animal use, although it may be unnecessary, could be considered morally excusable?
Morally excusable?
Yeah.
Well, desert islands always going back to desert islands.
There are desert islands. I think human. I mean, look, if you're on a desert island, if you and I are on a desert island, and I'm in a weakened condition, or you're in a weakened condition, and one of us kills and eats the other one, it's not morally justifiable. It's not right, but it may be morally excusable because there's a compulsion there. I mean, I think the only situations in which you can talk about moral excuse are situations of compulsion. I actually have some sympathy for people who have, if you have the hypothetical cat who's going to die if you don't feed the cat some animal product, what do? That's a sort of a desert island situation. There's a compulsion there. What really used to annoy the hell out of me was I would be giving a lecture and somebody would say, well, how do you deal with vegan cats? And then I would always say, are you vegan? And they would say, no, 90% of the time. And I'd say, what the hell are we talking about the cat for? Because, this is just this is silly. You're wasting time. But I think that there can be situations, the desert island situation, the lifeboat situation, those, situations of compulsion. I think it's wrong to exploit animals, but it might be excusable in that it's wrong, but we understand and we mitigate the culpability because of the compulsion. But I think those are also situations in which we would mitigate, the culpability because of the compulsion where humans are involved.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, this is looking at the time. This may well be the last question, but we'll see how it goes. It's a question from Carl, who says that he's very shy and has difficulties talking to people face to face. What other ways can he advocate?
Well, look, I think we all have an obligation. Anna's a very shy person, and I think that she had to really sort of overcome that in order to advocate, and I think a lot of people are shy. At some point, I think we need to say, look, we're not the ones who are in the cages and the slaughterhouses and the horrible situations, and we need to do whatever we can to sort of get out there and advocate. But everybody can do it. I mean, even if you're not comfortable doing it in large groups. I mean, I assume Carl has, look, Carl interacts with people. He may not be comfortable interacting in large groups. He may not be comfortable advocating in certain situations, but he is comfortable advocating in some situations and being in some situations. Not everybody has to advocate the same way. The message has got to be the same, but people can advocate in different ways. I mean, as Anna said before, the most important form of advocacy is what you do in the groups that you're part of, your friends, your family, your school, your work, your church, your whatever it is, whatever social groups you participate in. And I assume that Carl participates in those. And if all Carl does in the next year is get one of those people turned on to veganism, Carl's doing great. What do you think?
I think it's one of the reasons I do the webinars and things, because I think people can see that everyone can talk about this, really. One thing that Gary's right, I'm not the most out there person. I find it most comfortable when you sort of take on a role, as it were. And I've talked about this before. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I spent my life teaching, but it's kind of a role. And, I will be someone who dies at a cocktail party, but I can be a lawyer. But it's sort of, you put it on with the suit, I'm sorry, I took your thing.
She gets violent.
You're doing a job. And if you can take it, if you can sort of view it like that, sometimes it takes the personality out of it. But it doesn't, even if we're shy, I mean, I don't know, the question is personal circumstance, and there may be a mental health issue that I have no expertise in and very little perspective. So I'm sure there are some people who find it difficult in a way that we're not even talking about. But just shyness is something that we can all work around. Now with technology, there are ways to talk to people, to reach people that are not verbal, so you can hit your keyboard in a constructive way. You can get materials out there. You can go and make sure that your library has got abolitionist materials in it. Go and ask them to go and go and ask the library to order good books, so that you're getting a different interface with people. You're getting materials available to them not in the one-to-one sort of interactions. And you can do that in your high school, and you can do that in your universities and things like that. There are ways of getting materials out there. But also, this is something I think that we need to do, even if we're not terribly comfortable about it, because it's not about us. And our lack of comfort is nothing compared to the suffering and the inequities that we are addressing. So I think we need to do it even if we don't feel like it, and if it's not comfortable at the beginning. It gets a lot easier the more you do it. And, I think public speaking is like the number one dread that people have.
Yeah.
The idea of, going around a room and being introduced, you'll get CEOs who would say that's the most awful thing, that they waiting to be introduced is a frightening thing, even for people who have a public life. So, I think we need to face the fact that sometimes putting ourselves out there can be a bit nerve-wracking, but we need to do it anyway. And you'll usually find out that, you didn't die. You didn't have, you're not going, someone thinking badly of you is not going to ruin your life for the rest of your life. An interaction that didn't go just the way you would have planned it that's not the important thing. The important thing is the interaction. And you can become a very good advocate, because the genuineness of your presentation. It isn't a glib, slick presentation that you've given 50 times and you're not listening to the other person. A true interaction may be something that the shy person's really good at.
And you can always get better. Let me tell you a quick. I've been teaching since the mid 1980s, and I've had lots of students who are terrified about speaking in a large group of people.
Right.
Because I teach classes where there's 100 people, and some people are just terrified of speaking in a large group like that. So when you call on them, they freeze. And I've had students, I start teaching this coming week. I've got 200 people now. They're divided, amongst 3 classes, but they're big classes. And what I always do when people come, because they have for years and years and years come to me and said, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. The idea that you're going to call on me one of these days, I might, just end my life before that happens, because I can't stand the thought of talking in a large group. And what I always say, we go, and I have like things that I do with them. Like I tell them, okay, we're going to do this. I'm going to ease you into it. Okay.
It's my deaf boy.
Yeah, that's our deaf boy. He doesn't understand how loud his bark is. So what I do is I do things like, okay, I'm going to call on you, but this is the question I'm going to ask you, and we go through it, and then we play it in class. I call on the person, we have the exchange that we've practiced before. And you know what? I've had very few circumstances where people who have gone through that haven't become a lot more comfortable. I mean, not super happy, but they've gotten comfortable about speaking in a large group. This is something you can learn. People who are absolutely terrified about speaking in a large group can overcome that. And so, whatever Carl's situation is, there are ways around that. And, and one of the things that, that Carl can do is he can work with somebody who sort of does role play advocacy so that Carl gets comfortable doing it. We've
actually talked about that. And I might do some, because people think, oh, if she can do it, anyone can do it. But watch the Facebook page, because we've actually talked about perhaps having some sessions on a platform that don't go onto YouTube or whatever. So it's a private... seminars, just
working with people,
discussions about something, so that you get ideas and encouragement, and it's not in a public setting, and no one's going to be judging you and saying anything like that. So that might, if we get some time, just watch the Facebook page. We might.
And one of the things we've talked about is working with people who have issues like Carl's, because he's not alone. Right. About, hey, I'm shy. And the answer is what that really means for most people, and I'm not speaking for Carl, and there could be other situations, but what that means for most people is they just don't know how to speak in groups. That's because they've never had that experience. But like most things, you can learn.
Right.
Sure. I think Carl's situation is probably in the majority rather than being unusual.
Yeah,
it doesn't relate to your personality, as you say. It just relates to your lack of experience.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Course, you'd be surprised.
Knowing the subject, of course, is a great deal of help as well, which a lot of people have to educate themselves about advocacy before they can even approach being confident about it.
Exactly.
So I think seminars and role plays are a brilliant idea, and good for you if you can do that. I suppose the obvious alternative to public speaking is online advocacy, which Anna mentioned. But of course, that does have its drawbacks, doesn't it? I mean, you lose the personal touch, you lose tone, you lose body language, and of course, it's a lot easier for people to have an argument with you over the internet than it is face to face.
Sure. No. The things that Carl's talking about, they're valid. They're really valid, and you're right, Alan. They are. They're more common than not common, but it is a matter of learning things. I mean, I have to tell you this. Some of the best students I've had in terms of people who have become wonderful classroom participants started off very shy and had to go through this sort of thing. And then once they learned and they saw that, they could do it, they could actually, once they had the experience of saying something in front of 100 people and not having, not having the world end, it's remarkable to see how some of those people blossom, many of them actually.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks for that. I think we've just about reached the end of our 2 hours. We've got a few messages from the room tonight. Juan Paolo says, "Thank you for everything, Gary and Anna. Eternally grateful for your work and dedication." Fur says, "I've been devouring your books over the last weeks. Hope you put plenty of tomato ketchup on them. Just brilliant. Just brilliant. We needed to spread the message." Anne says, "Thanks to everyone for the ideas and support." Nicole says, "I'm so glad I joined this webinar. Thank you all so much." Laura says, "So enlightening and encouraging." And finally, Kylie says, "Always great to hear Gary and Anna talk." So
I'd like to thank you, Alan,
thanks everybody.
for
thanks,
arranging
Alan,
this, for everyone who's been dealing with the questions. We really appreciate the work that everyone's puts in around these webinars.
I'd just like to thank also our Francis, who's been beavering away on the control panel here, keeping everyone in check.
Francis, who designed our new pamphlets.
These
Francis's 5 beautiful pamphlets.
Okay. And our moderators who've been online dealing with questions, there's Christina, Jeff, Jenny, Sandy, and Vanda. Have all been
lovely, wonderful people. Thank you all very much.
Okay. So thanks very much again, Gary and Anna. We look forward to the next one, and we wish you all a very good night.
Get out
there. Peace. Bye. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.